Jonathan Paulette. It's, I guess, Monday, January 26th. If you work in oil and gas or you want to, you are in the right place. Today or tonight, depending on which time zone you're in, we're covering three big topics. First, the latest in geopolitics, specifically the Iran situation and what the US might do and how it impacts the energy sector. Second is careers, living and working internationally in oil and gas, and how those same geopolitics ties into the daily life and what career paths are hot right now. And third, my offerings. I'll share how I help you one-on-one with your career or your operations, plus I'll answer your questions live. We have a full hour, probably more so like 30, 45 minutes. But so get comfortable and let's dive in. All right, before we get into the meat of it, a quick chat guide. I'm here to help you, so I welcome your questions at any time. To make sure I see it, you can give a clear answer. Please format your question like this: your role, your country, years of experience, and your goal or question in one sentence, specifically around oil and gas. For example, floor hand, Canada, 2 years, want to work offshore, any tips? That lets me quickly understand your situation and give you targeted advice. So, as we go along, don't hesitate, drop in your questions in that format. This is hopefully an interactive session, and your participation makes it better. So, starting with a quick intro. For me, for those who are new, I work internationally in oil and gas. I'm currently based in the Middle East. I have about 25 years of experience, with 15 of those being overseas across more than 11 countries. I've done everything from rigs to corporate planning, so I've seen a lot of what this industry can throw at you. These days, I have two main focuses. I help oil and gas professionals get hired faster and advance their careers by creating focused strategies for them. And number two, I help drilling teams and operations improve performance remotely, catching problems before they escalate. So I blend the career coaching side with on-the-ground operations consulting, and that's why tonight's topics range from global geopolitical analysis to very practical career advice. So here's how we'll flow. We'll start with the geopoliticals and energy segment, using Iran as the case study, because understanding the global context can make you better at your job and your career decisions. Then we'll transition into the career segment, talking about working abroad, high demand oil and gas roles, and tips to stand out. Let's start with Iran. Iran has been in the news lately, and it's been in massive turmoil recently. Late December 2025, there was nationwide anti-regime protest erupting across Iran. Still see reports that there are some still ongoing, although because of the blackout, we don't really see it in the news. But it's been driven by economic frustration, political grievances, and calls for change. These protests pick up serious momentum into January 2026, and we're talking chants like "Long live the Shah," which is a throwback to Iran's pre-1979 monarchy, and "Death to Khamenei," openly calling out the supreme leader. This is something we haven't seen at this scale in decades, and it spreads to cities all over Iran. So how did the Iranian government respond? Unfortunately, with extreme force. Around January 8th and 9th, there was a particularly brutal crackdown, basically a massacre. The numbers are all over the place depending on sources, but it's clear it was horrific. Iranian state media eventually admitted to a death toll a bit above 3,000 people, but independent and opposition sources suggest a far higher number. In fact, some reports, like one from Iran's International Editorial Board, claim over 36,500 people were killed by security forces in just those 2 days of crackdown. That is an insane number. I don't know if it's 3,000, I don't know if it's 36,000, but it's tens of thousands, possibly people killed in 48 hours. Even if the number is somewhere in between, it's by far one of the bloodiest repressions of a protest movement in modern history. And there are accounts that security forces even went into hospitals and shot wounded protesters who were being treated. So truly, truly grim. This level of violence understandably drew condemnation from around the world. the United Nations Human Rights Council held an emergency session to address Iran's actions. Western governments, including the US and many in Europe, have spoken out, but words, I think, are pretty hollow at this point. I mean, words are one thing, but what we really need is action, if there's going to be any. On the US side, the response has escalated quickly. As many of you know, President Donald Trump has taken a very hard public line on this. Earlier this month, Trump pointedly warned Iran leadership not to slaughter protesters. He literally said the US is locked and loaded to protect the protesters. It's pretty stark language coming out of Washington, but around January 12th, he even mentioned sending in an armada to the region. And this wasn't a bluff, because the US has moved a significant amount of military assets towards the Persian Gulf over the last couple of weeks. We've seen an aircraft carrier strike group led by the USS Abraham Lincoln redirected to the Gulf, additional fighter squadrons, including F-35s, sent to bases in the Middle East, and apparently even some troop deployments or readiness preparations just in case. This kind of buildup echoes that famous carrier diplomacy strategy. It's meant to signal strength and deterrence. So why is the US doing this? Let's break down the possible objectives here, because it's really just one thing. Objective one could be coercion. The US wants to pressure Iran's leadership, basically saying, we are watching and you will pay a price if you keep massacring your people. What's interesting is that Khamenei is reportedly having gone underground to a bunker in fear of US intervention. But how long can you stay in a bunker? At some point, he's going to need to come out, and I'm sure the US, with their bunker busting bombs, can either get to him or lock him in there permanently in a tomb. So by moving assets in, Washington is trying to coerce Iran into restraint. Maybe it's hoping that just the fear of US action will make the Iranian regime scale back the violence. We'll have to see, only time will tell. The next is containment. Objective two, the US wants to contain Iran's influence and prevent the situation from spiraling into something that threatens American personnel or allies in the region. So we'll see. I think if that's the case, then we're going to see not only American bases in the region, but we'll need to see a long-term fleet presence in the region. And objective three would be leverage for a deal or for change. Some analysts believe the US may be using this crisis as leverage, either to push Iran back into some negotiation. Remember, US officials won't publicly say this, but we want regime change. That's very provocative. By applying maximum pressure like this, sometimes has the unspoken goal of cracking the regime from within. So we will see. I do not know anybody in Kurdistan. But if you do, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that. One thing is clear, while the US is posturing very aggressively, it does not actually want an all-out war. Nobody wants to spark a full-blown conflict in the Middle East. If it can be avoided, the cost would be enormous and unpredictable. It's pretty grim. I mean, you've got, if you look at what happened in Iraq, that was pretty much destabilized, and we had one strong ruler that the West didn't like, removed from power, and their whole region went into chaos. So hopefully we can avoid that. What do you think the United States is really aiming for here? Is it trying to force Iran's hand to make a deal, hoping the regime cracks from inside, or preparing for some kind of limited strike? Let me know. You can put your notes in the chat. I'm curious how you read the situation. All right, so let's look at it from the other side. Iran's response to all this US pressure. Iran's government, especially the hardliners and the IRGC, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, are responding with a mix of defiance and warnings. Essentially, they are saying to the world, back off, or it's going to be all-out war. Just a few days ago, a huge mural appeared in Tehran. Maybe you saw this on social media. If you did, make a note in the comments. Depicting a warning of retaliation if the US strikes. High-ranking officials, like Iran's foreign minister, have publicly stated that any limited strike by the US would be treated as all-out war. In other words, Iran is signaling that there is no such thing in their minds as a small surgical hit. If the US bombs even one target, Iran says it will unleash everything it has in response. But given what the US military has proven lately, I'm not so sure that it would be effective. So why are they saying this? It's a strategy. Iran knows it can't match the US in a head-to-head conventional fight. The US military is far superior, but Iran has a lot of asymmetric capabilities and regional proxy allies. They're basically telegraphing, if you hit us, we'll hit back in ways that hurt, maybe through missile strikes on US bases, attacks in Israel, closing the Straits of Hormuz, cyber attacks, or unleashing proxy militias into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen, you name it. They want the US and its allies to think that any strike could spiral into a much larger regional conflict that nobody can control. This is a classic deterrence messaging from the Iranian side. Raises the perceived cost of aggression so high that the other side might blink first. But we'll see. Trump is stated that help is on the way. I think his later comments stating that, the executions have stopped, we're not going to do anything. I think that's just a ploy to lower the Iranian guard, and we'll see some form of intervention, but time will tell. We've also heard some fiery statements from the IRGC commanders. They put their forces on high alert. Iran has conducted military exercises testing ballistic missiles and drones as show of readiness. I'm actually in the Middle East right now, so I am watching this very closely. And these moves are meant for internal audience to show strength to their own people and quash the notion that the regime is weak, and for the external audience, like Washington, to make them think twice. Another thing Iran tends to do in these moments is to leverage diplomacy with countries like Russia and China, basically to get some major powers on their side, or at least to urge restraint from the US. So behind the scenes, I'm sure these are all messages being passed via back channels. We know that Oman, Qatar, and other intermediaries often carry messages between Washington and Tehran. Even when leaders are shouting at each other in public, they usually have quiet communications going to avoid accidental war. We'll see. I don't know if those channels get shut down. It could mean that things are going to get tense real quick. And for those joining, this is Practical Energy Insights Live. Welcome. I'm Jonathan, talking about the Iran-US tensions and what they mean for energy. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat, especially if you work in oil and gas or aspire to. I'm here to help give clarity on both the geopolitical picture and a possible career in oil and gas, if that is what you're working towards. I'll move to careers in a bit, but right now we're unpacking the risks around Iran. If you hopped in late, a quick recap. Protests in Iran met with brutal crackdown. The US has moved an armada to deter further violence, and Iran's responding with threats to retaliate against US action. I will search that. Thank you. All right. Potential US actions. So we've got what the US might actually do. I think there's a few different options here. We'll go from least risky options to most risky. Think of it as a spectrum of responses. And I don't necessarily think they're mutually exclusive. You could see parts of several of these. First one is more of the same: economic pressure, sanctions 2.0. It's the most likely tool. It's what the sanctions, the US tends to do, is limit people economically. They've already tightened the screws further in recent days, for example, imposing new sanctions on shipping companies and vessels that are part of what's often called Iran's shadow fleet of oil tankers. Yes, I think the US knows that BRICS exists. I see that in the chat. However, I think everything that we're seeing today with Greenland and Venezuela and Iran is the United States' way to push back against countries that might be trying to move away from the dollar. They're exerting their influence. So, and from what I've seen, you know, Maduro and Russia and China were good friends, but they really didn't do much to help Maduro out. So, being part of BRICS, I'm not so sure militarily helps anybody at this point. We might see more secondary sanctions. That's when the US tells other countries or companies, if you do business with Iran, like buying their oil or assisting their shipping, you'll be cut off from US financial system. Maritime enforcement, next step up, the US and allies could get more aggressive on the high seas. Short of firing shots, we're talking about interdictions and seizures. This is already happening in some form. Last year, if you recall, the US seized an Iranian oil tanker. They were violating the sanctions. Moving forward with more naval assets in the region, the US could ramp up inspections of ships near the Straits of Hormuz or in the Gulf of Oman. They could even physically stop and impound tankers suspected of carrying sanctioned oil. They'll also put pressure on countries like Panama or Liberia, which provides flags to many ships, to deflag any tankers breaking the rules. This kind of maritime enforcement is more confrontational than just sanctions on paper, but still a notch below shooting war, so I guess that's good. The dollar is definitely weakening, but I would say any government that has strength that is on the way out is a threat. It's like the death throes of an animal, right? So I'm not going to count the US out at the moment. I still think they are going to be around for a long time, but we might see a little bit more independence economically from other actors. Regional force posture. We're already seeing this happening. The US has moved a carrier strike group into the region and likely some bombers and special forces. By keeping these forces visible and publicizing their presence, the US is sending a signal. We have the capability here to strike if we choose. So this ups the psychological pressure. Gold is very expensive right now, so buying gold now is tough to do. We have capabilities here to strike if we choose. This ups the psychological pressure on Iran's leadership. It's also a way to reassure US allies in the Gulf like Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc., and partners like Israel that the US has their back if Iran tries something. One could call this deterrence by presence. It's a show of force without actually exerting any force. We'll probably continue to see high-profile military exercises or patrols in the region. However, keeping big assets deployed is expensive and can't be sustained forever. Carriers eventually have to resupply or rotate out, so this is somewhat time-bound as leverage. However, I believe this carrier group spent 295 days at sea on its straight without a break on its last deployment, and I think it also has been recently overhauled, so it's ready for action. Diplomatic isolation and coalition building alongside the muscle flexing. The US will be doing the diplomatic heavy lifting. This means rallying European allies, regional partners, and maybe even countries like India or Japan who have stakes in Gulf stability to condemn Iran's actions. Remember, Japan, they don't have any oil, so they need to import it. So I could see them being a key ally in this. There's also covert and cyber options. Now we're getting into murkier territory. The US and its allies might engage in covert actions to undermine Iran's crackdowns or Iran's capabilities. That could range from quietly providing support to dissidents to sabotage of Iranian infrastructure. For instance, cyber attacks on Iran's security networks or logistics. The thing with covert ops is we usually don't hear about them in real time. We might only guess something's happened if, say, a mysterious explosion occurs at an IRGC base or Iran's internet is suddenly restored in protest areas due to an outside hack. Cyber warfare is a big one here. The US and Israel, too, have very sophisticated cyber units. They might attempt to disrupt Iran's communications, missile systems, or even financial networks. And these actions are deniable and hard to trace. So makes it less likely that we're going to know about it in real time, but we'll probably find out after the fact, if anything. I think the last posture is limited kinetic strikes. It's the riskiest end of the spectrum, short of full war. I don't think the US is posturing for a full on war. I don't think they have the resources, and I don't think the American people or the world want that. Actually launching airstrikes or missile strikes on specific targets in Iran, I think that's what possibly we could see. And those targets might be IRGC facilities involved in crackdowns, maybe nuclear sites if the issue shifts to the nuclear realm, or even assets like drones or missile bases that could threaten US forces. Also, Khamenei has gone into a bunker, so it's possible that they take out the bunker, but I really don't see them doing that. I can't see them killing the leader of another country like that. It'd be bad PR and could possibly martyr Khamenei, and you would not want to do that. So, yeah, those are the options. I would say the US playbook has a lot of different options at their disposal. Right now, I'd say we're firmly in the economic pressure and force posture layer with a dash of coalition building. The covert stuff we just can't be sure of, and it's probably going quietly. So kinetic strikes are the wild card that everybody's watching for, but hoping to avoid. So what do you think would be the trigger for the US to actually carry out a strike? For example, would an attack on US personnel push it over the line, or a direct threat to oil shipping? Share your thoughts. What do you see as a red line that could spark actual military action? That brings us to triggers. So those red lines, from everything I'm reading and hearing, a few key questions will determine if this escalates or calms down. US personnel or bases attacked. This is probably the biggest red line. If Iran or its proxy militias in places like Iran or Syria attack American soldiers, diplomats, or bases and cause casualties, the US almost certainly would retaliate militarily. We've seen this pattern in the past. Even recent history, when US troops in Iraq or Syria faced rocket attacks by Iran-backed groups, the US did limited strikes on those groups' facilities. So everyone's watching places like Al Udeid base in Qatar, bases in UAE, US installations in Iraq. So far, I haven't seen reports of any major incidents. There are, in this crisis, which suggests Iran is deliberately holding back. But we have also seen airlines canceling flights to the Middle East. So there's the back channels are talking. So something that I'm interested in is, do energy flows face a credible threat? I'm in the oil and gas industry, currently in the Middle East. It affects me directly. If the whole place goes up into turmoil, or suddenly we can't ship oil or LNG through the Straits of Hormuz, it could cause major disruption and problems. So in particular, the Straits of Hormuz and other shipping lanes. The Straits of Hormuz is a narrow choke point, if you don't know, at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, through which something like 20% of global oil passes. So if you think about how many millions of barrels of oil per day and LNG are going through that, if Iran threatens to close the strait, or it starts like we're going to see a mysterious incident like mines in the water or tankers being harassed or attacked, that would be a huge escalation. Even a perceived threat to Hormuz tends to send oil prices up. And the US Fifth Fleet, based in Bahrain, and other international navies would likely act fast to keep that corridor open. But if a real attempt to block it happened, it could easily trigger military confrontation. So far, aside from some earlier incidents last year, we haven't seen new tanker attacks in this current phase, but everybody's watching pretty closely. So, does Iran announce a major nuclear escalation? Iran's nuclear program is always the backdrop. Right now, Iran is already enriching uranium at high levels. And the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, is basically moribund. So there's still IAEA monitoring to some extent. If Iran, feeling cornered, said we're kicking out inspectors and racing to build a bomb, that would force the US or Israel's hand. In fact, just recently, the IAEA has been complaining that Iran isn't fully cooperating. Does internal unrest in Iran spill over regionally? By this, I mean, could the protests or the regime's actions cause problems for neighboring countries? Particularly, for example, a flood of refugees into Turkey or Azerbaijan, or ethnic clashes spilling over Iran's borders, such as Kurdish regions affecting Iraq, or Balak areas affecting Pakistan. If Iran's instability starts impacting other countries, those countries and their allies might push for more regional action. Also, Iran sometimes accuses foreign countries of stirring unrest among its minorities. If Iran truly believed, say, Saudi Arabia or the US were behind protests, as they often claim, they might retaliate against those countries in covert ways. All right. I am running out of time here, so I'm going to have to end this live stream. I will pick it up again tomorrow. I did not get an opportunity to talk about oil and gas careers, how this regional tension is affecting oil and gas careers. So I will do that in tomorrow's live stream. And I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you for joining in, and see you next time.